Good morning. 8 parties, 12 detectives and a £460,000 investigation later. Is the country's luckiest Prime Minister about to defy political gravity once again? Partygate isn't quite over for Boris Johnson. The long-awaited report from senior civil servant Sue Gray could land within days. And there are wranglings over what exactly is and isn't going to be published. There hasn't been a renewed clamour among Conservative MPs for the Prime Minister to go yet. Could the gory details of lockdown parties yet to emerge and the threat of some challenging by-elections ahead be what brings his leadership crashing back to earth? With the Sue Gray report out next week, why did the Prime Minister secretly meet with the woman who's writing it a few weeks ago? What did they talk about? Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi is here to explain. As soaring gas and electricity prices continue to drive the cost of living crisis, I talk to the boss of one of the UK's biggest energy suppliers, E.ON. How high will bills go and can customers cope? Monkeypox is making headlines. We've got everything you need to know from the woman at the heart of the government's public health team, Dr. Susan Hopkins. And why does the universe exist? Is there life beyond our solar system? You won't find the answers in the Sue Gray report. But don't worry, Professor Brian Cox is here to help. And here to review the papers, property guru Kirsty Alsop and news website Politico's political editor Jack Blanchard. But first, the news with Seema Katecha.
Good morning. The long-awaited report into gatherings in Downing Street during lockdown is expected to be published within days. The senior civil servant, Sue Gray, has given people she intends to name in her report until 5 p.m. today to respond. Meanwhile, pressure is growing on the Prime Minister to explain what was discussed at a meeting between him and Ms Gray several weeks ago. The Australian Labor Party says it's hopeful that it will be able to govern on its own after it toppled the centre-right coalition led by Scott Morrison and was returned to power for the first time since 2013. The new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is currently just short of being able to command an outright majority in the country's parliament, with millions of votes yet to be counted. The Ukrainian government says it won't agree to a ceasefire with Russia that involves giving up territory. A presidential advisor said making concessions would backfire on Kyiv because Moscow would immediately escalate the war after any break in fighting. Russian forces are advancing in the east of the country. The Duke and Duchess of Cornwall will star in a special episode of EastEnders next month to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. They visited the set in March, but the fact they'd taken part in filming was kept under wraps until now. Prince Charles and Camilla will play themselves as they make a surprise appearance at a street party on the square. That's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Seema Katecha there. Let's have a look at some of the front pages, starting with the Sunday Times. The headline there, NHS covered up ambulance death scandal. We'll be discussing one of the headlines there at the bottom. Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson clash over how to spend windfall tax. Of course, that argument has been raging on in Cabinet between ministers for a number of weeks. On the front page of the Mail, it says Channel migrants are already asking to be sent home, not to African centres. This is the government's policy of sending some asylum seekers that land on the shores of the UK to Rwanda. Rwanda asylum plan is working, says the headline. On the Observer, as you can see, the papers are all going on different stories today, but Prime Minister to sacrifice top official over Partygate to save himself. That top official is the most senior civil servant, Simon Case, who you may remember recused himself for covering an investigation into Partygate at the very beginning. The Sunday Telegraph has Tories in threat to torpedo unions. This is the threat and the prospect of a summer of strikes across the rail network. Talk about legislation that wouldn't come in time to necessarily stop those strikes, but later on in the year. On the Sunday Express, free tuition pledge for all pupils. The Education Secretary, as you know, is joining me a little later on in the programme. And in the Mirror, Wagatha Christie exclusive, the case that's gripped the nation. Colleen, it's in the bag. Let's go to our guests and the paper reviewers. Jack, let's start with the story in The Observer, extensively covered, which is this Sue Gray investigation of Partygate. We've been waiting for a very long time, and she was told, of course, not to publish it while the police investigation was going on. How much danger is the Prime Minister still in?
Well, it feels like he's through the worst of it, to be honest, but this is going to be another big moment, and perhaps the last big moment in this never-ending saga. Westminster is very much on tenterhooks this week. We don't know for sure we're going to see the report this week, but we are expecting that to happen. Sue Gray's report is going to give, in what the Observer calls gruesome detail, party by party, exactly what went on at Downing Street during those lockdown months in 2020, and it's going to make pretty grim reading for the Prime Minister and others who work there as well. The speculation, although again we don't know this for sure, in The Observer is that Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary and the top Whitehall official, may lose his job over this, and it certainly would be very Boris Johnson, wouldn't it, if all of those around him were sort of moved out and the Prime Minister strode on triumphantly out of this.
Simon Case hasn't actually been fined, has he?
Simon Case has not been fined, although he has been accused of hosting his own lockdown event, maybe party. We don't really know the detail, and that is one of the things we should find out in this report. And the other thing that's going to be fascinating in this report, the thing that I think journalists are particularly excited by, is the prospect of photos being published. Now, there are apparently dozens, perhaps hundreds of photos that have been taken at some of these events. Indeed. Now, we don't know, again, whether we're going to see all of those, a nice selection of those, but I do think, personally, they have the potential to be the most damaging thing of all, because there is something so arresting about the sight of people actually there having these parties. If the Prime Minister was pictured in some of those, with goodness knows what he might have been up to, but, you know, that is something that people would not forget quickly.
I mean, Kirsty, you will know that politicians, including Boris Johnson, have said repeatedly it's time to move on once we get the outcome of the Metropolitan Police investigation and Sue Gray's report. How do you feel? Is it time to move on and draw a line under what we now know as Partygate?
Jo, the problem is almost every other story we are going to look at today is related to the lockdown in some way. The current economic situation, the situation with the NHS, you know, the trains, the unions, whatever we've picked, Jack and I have picked from the papers that we've discussed, a lot of it is related to the impact of lockdowns. And the Partygate shows that they didn't understand what the rules were, and they didn't understand the impact. And when you think about those photos, nobody was taking photos of, you know, you just weren't. If you look at your phone from that time, it's completely different from previous years. And all of this indicates that they didn't understand the impact of the rules that they imposed. Whether or not the rules were right or wrong, you've got to follow them if you set them.
He did get one fine, Boris Johnson, and that's it, now we know, for the birthday party, as did Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor. I mean, the headline there in the Times is Johnson's Partygate hangover. Do you think there is going to be an ongoing hangover?
Well, undoubtedly, and although the sort of received wisdom in Westminster now is that in the short term at least, he's got away with it in the sense that his MPs are not about to sling him out of office, given the delay in this report, thanks to the Met Police, then the Ukraine war overtaking everything, and rightly so. You know, that might be the case for now, but the real question is, are voters going to forgive him for what happened? And so far, there is no evidence at all that they do. His polling has not recovered. Focus group after focus group shows how angry people still are about this. And so the big problem for the Prime Minister is not what happens this week, but how does it impact the next election?
Well, you said, Kirsty, the issue of the cost of living is in sharp focus.
Yes.
You've picked out a story there in the Mail. It's Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert there, on how to survive the crunch and why Boris and Rishi must stop dithering. That, of course, is to do with this decision over a windfall tax. But more broadly, where do you see it from your perspective as a housing expert? Of course, cost of living is also tied up with house prices, the difficulties for renters.
The difficulties for renters are that Airbnb and other similar websites didn't exist a few years ago. And now landlords are putting their properties on, not with 2, 3, 4 year contracts, but with these short-term contracts because they get more money. And we've got 4 million more renters than we did 20 years ago, and they are in a very difficult position because if your landlord serves you notice and you have to move, that is incredibly expensive. It is an additional cost. And it's one that at the moment people just can't afford. And we have to have a more settled rental market. Aside from the fact that the purchase prices are just going up and up and up, and it's a more heated market than I've ever seen in my entire life.
And has that surprised you?
We all thought when COVID first came that there would be an impact, and it would be a negative impact on property, but it seems to have been the opposite. Now, it's not a positive thing, but it is up, up, up.
It does seem amazingly heated and continuing to be. Of course, the biggest problem for politicians and parties over the years has been building more houses in the numbers that they need to. And then, in terms of cost of living and how to tackle it and help those who need it most, Jack, the story, of course, is about this windfall tax. It has been going on for so long about whether they are going to do it. Do you get a sense that they are?
I think we're inching in that direction. I mean, this is the absolute will they, won't they story of this summer, isn't it? It's not a very Tory thing to do, but Labour have come out hard with a windfall tax on energy companies, and the reality is that the public really like the idea. You look at the vast profits these companies are making, people are looking at their own energy and fuel bills going through the roof, and it feels like the right thing to do, and that is the problem that the Conservatives have got. The story in the Sunday Times today, Tim Shipman's piece, pretty authoritative on this, suggests that Rishi Sunak is now moving in this direction, but trying to figure out a way that feels a bit more conservative. And the idea being floated here is that maybe these companies would get to pay a reduced rate of tax if they invest some of these vast profits in the economy, which is, of course, one of the things that everybody wants them to do.
Jack, I don't know about you, but my thing with the windfall tax is how are they going to distribute the money they get in? It's not so much whether they decide to get it in, it's how they can get it to the people most in need as fast as possible. Someone suggested to me yesterday that reducing VAT was the quickest way to help the poorest because they're impacted most by VAT. But I'd like to hear from Rishi Sunak, as you know, and on the same day he says if there is going to be a windfall tax, what is he going to do with it?
And that is the other big discussion going on in government. How much more help do they think they can afford to offer, and what would it look like? There are other ideas around warm home discounts, essentially giving money to help people to pay these enormous energy bills that are just going up and up and are going to go up again. But it's important to say as well that the Conservative Party is not agreed on this, and if you look at the story in the Sunday Telegraph, and it's elsewhere as well, there are senior cabinet ministers coming out this weekend saying, I don't want a windfall tax. Brandon Lewis has said it, Sajid Javid, the former Chancellor, has said it, and so this is not an easy ride. In fact, the Prime Minister ideologically definitely doesn't like the idea either. And so, this is not a settled view, but I think you come back to just the simple polling on it. This is like 80% of the public
very popular.
Like this idea. You've got the opposition saying, do it, do it, do it. It's very difficult for the government not to be seen to be acting.
Kirsty, can I get you to take us through the story? We're going to skip ahead just a little bit in the Mail, which is NHS boss ramps up pressure on hospitals over visitor rules, because this is something close to yours and many people's hearts in terms of access to relatives and friends they may have in hospital.
Joe, it's incredibly important. People have been, frankly, tortured for the last 2 years, and it's gone on far, far longer than it should have. This is NHS England,
yes,
which has said we don't know what's going to happen in Scotland and Wales, but people are still being barred long term for weeks and weeks and weeks from seeing relatives who have had strokes, who are having major surgery, and it's not good enough, and it should never have happened. And I hope it's addressed when we do have an opportunity to talk all things COVID next year. I hope it is addressed.
Well, I mean, she is certainly, Amanda Pritchard, if not mandating it because she probably can't, is asking hospitals to look at individual setups around the country.
If she can't mandate it, one wants to know why, really.
Right. Thank you very much to both of you for joining me here. And now to the weather. I think it's going to be quite nice when we leave the studio. Over to Susan Powell.
Good morning. The sun is battling through the cloud at the moment, Joe. In some areas, though, as the sun comes out, what we'll tend to see are some showers developing. So no guarantee with the sun that you're in for an entirely dry day, aside from areas closest to high pressure, which means southern counties of England and East Anglia, the high stretches in here from the near continent. And it will stay fine here throughout the day today, and it should turn out to be somewhat warmer than yesterday as well. Elsewhere, quite a veil of clouds spread out across the UK at the moment, but thinning and breaking all the while across the Midlands and for northern England. Sunny spells, I think, for the afternoon. But if we look in closely, you can see just the odd shower perhaps showing its hand, maybe the odd one for the southwest of England, but perhaps more so around Cardigan Bay this afternoon and stretching into the northwest of England across to the Pennines. A little bit cooler with a little bit more cloud here, so temperatures 18, 19 degrees. These showers across Northern Ireland and southern Scotland could turn out to be heavy and thundery through the afternoon. For northwestern Scotland, it's a stubborn band of cloud and rain, a weather front in place. It will stay grey here and consequently somewhat cooler. And then Monday, well, there's a chance of rain just about anywhere across the UK, perhaps some particularly heavy downpours across eastern England. And it is looking cooler for the first half of the week ahead, but it should settle down once again, I think, by the time we get to Friday and next weekend.
Food prices are rising, fuel costs are rising, but what's really driving this cost of living crisis is the price of energy. Bills jumped by 54% in April as the energy price cap rose to reflect the international cost suppliers pay for gas. In October, it's going up again. By how much could determine whether thousands of families can afford to heat their homes this winter. Michael Lewis, the boss of one of Britain's biggest energy suppliers, E.ON, joins me now. Welcome to you. Michael, I want to just get a sense of the scale and really the depth of the problem that is being faced by millions, no doubt, of your customers. Are you already seeing an increase in the number of customers who can't pay their bills?
Well, first of all, just to comment on the macro picture, as you've already mentioned in your introduction, this is unprecedented. In my 30 years in the energy industry, I've never seen prices increase at this rate. Clearly, all about the gas flow from Russia and the Ukraine situation.
Is it all about that?
It's predominantly about that, yes. The problem is the gas price has gone up very significantly. The gas price also drives the electricity price because the gas generation sets the price for electricity. So that's why both have gone up. So it is unprecedented and we don't know what's going to happen in October. What we do know is that we are seeing a significant number of people in fuel poverty. That's to say more than 10% of their disposable income spent on energy. And that's risen to around 20%. And in October, our model suggests that that could rise to 40% if the government doesn't intervene in some way.
Right, up to 40%. And for you and for your company, what is the increase specifically in the number of customers who you feel now or know can't pay their bills?
Well, that gives you an indication, the
Yes.
number being in fuel poverty. What we know is there are around about 1 million of our 8 million accounts that are already in some kind of arrears. Now, not all of that turns into bad debt. Some people are just late payers. But we expect that number to increase by around 50% come October when the price rises again. So it's a very, very significant impact. And that's why we've called upon the government to take more action. We do need more intervention in October, and it has to be very substantial.
You'll be talking to those customers all the time,
Yeah.
I'm sure. What are they actually saying to you? What are the anxiety levels like?
Well, it's very, very difficult, particularly for people on benefits or very low income. I read emails from customers regularly. I listen in on calls and, frankly, some people are at the edge. They simply cannot pay. And that will get worse once prices go up again in October, because, of course, we're entering the summer period now when people are turning their heating off anyway. October, we'll see a price rise and an increase in consumption. That's when it's going to hit, and that's why we've called for more intervention from government in October.
I'm going to ask you what you think that intervention should actually look like and how much you think the government should be stepping in terms of paying or providing grants for those bills. But let's stick with the customers for the moment. They're in touch with you. They're already talking to you about it. What are you saying to them? What reassurance can you give them?
Well, there's several things we try and do. We have a number of schemes we can help. For instance, the Warm Home Discount Scheme, the Eco Scheme, where we can help with energy efficiency. And we try and identify those customers who are really struggling, and we have the E.ON Energy Fund where we can make direct payments to them. So there's a whole host of things we can do directly. But the scale of this is simply too big for us to manage at the moment.
Right, so you are in a situation where you feel you can't manage it with the millions of customers that you're talking about.
Indeed, the scale of this,
All right.
as I said, is unprecedented, and that's why we're calling for more intervention from government.
Do you have any idea, can you tell our viewers, how much more or how high the new energy price cap in October is going to be?
Well, at the moment, it's impossible to say because it depends on the development of prices over the next few months, because we're still in what's called the observation period. However, if you look at most of the analysts,
Yes.
they're predicting around 2,600 to 2,800.
And does that sound right?
It sounds in the right ballpark, yes, but it does depend on future price developments, but that's probably not far away from where it will land.
Right, but it could be more than that. It could be up to £3,000.
It could be, if prices develop adversely.
Are customers already, in your experience, trying to use less energy? I know we're coming into the summer months, but are they already trying to do that?
Well, we did a survey of 500 customers to check what their habits were, and what we found is that 66% of people have said they have reduced their heating, but actually it's not just about energy, it's also about food, and 1/3 said they'd actually reduced the amount they spend on food as well. But what we saw in that survey is that around 71% of people are concerned about their energy bill.
All right, you've made that very clear, and I'm going to come on to your responsibility in trying to help some of your customers. Would increasing universal credit help your customers with these bills?
Absolutely, it will help the people at the bottom of the income range who are most adversely affected by this.
Right, and what else? You've talked about the Warm Homes discount, but we are only talking, Michael, about hundreds of pounds, whereas people's energy bills could be going up by far more.
Well, the Warm Homes discount is a scheme that works well, and it's a scheme that we can rapidly increase, both in terms of the amount of money and the scope, i.e. the number of customers. So if we were to expand the scope from 3 million to 6 million customers and increase the payment from £140 up to £600, that would make a very, very big difference to those customers in the lowest income decile.
What's your view about a windfall tax on oil and gas companies? Is it something you would support?
Well, for us, the most important thing is that the government intervenes. It's up to the government to decide how they fund that.
All right.
All I would say is it's important that when they are taxing to address this challenge, that they tax those with the broadest shoulders.
I said that you probably can do more and E.ON can do more to help. People will also look at your profits. £6.6 billion in profits E.ON made last year. You reportedly made £1 million. What can you do to help customers? Can that money be used to make the system fairer when it comes to charging customers, particularly for poorer people?
Well, the most important thing to say about that number is that covers our whole group. We're active in 13 different countries. So that 6.6 billion is across 13 different countries.
But it's still £6.6 billion of profit.
If you look at the UK specifically, we've lost almost £1 billion over the last 3 years. We came back into profitability last year, and we make approximately £20 per customer. That's our profit.
But you're keen to see the government. You're keen to see the government intervene, and I understand that. But what people may say that overall, I take your point about the UK arm of E.ON. Overall, it is still £6.6 billion in profit. Let me just give you an example of the system that will seem rigged against poorer customers, not deliberately, but still rigged. If I'm an E.ON customer in the East Midlands, paying via direct debit, the standing charge I pay for electricity is 42.6 pence per day. If I'm on a prepayment meter, which poorer customers tend to use, I pay 47.3 pence per day. Why can't that be fairer?
Well, those tariffs are regulated by Ofgem. We don't set those prices. They're set by the regulator.
You could lobby Ofgem. You could talk to them about changing the system.
Of course we do, and we've lobbied for a social tariff which would take the most vulnerable customers out of the market and guarantee them the lowest price. But as things stand at the moment, those prices are regulated by Ofgem, and the reason why the standing charge has gone up so much, by the way, is because of all of the supplier failures we saw last year. That's now come into our bills, and it's £68 per customer, 20 pence a day to pay for the chaos and failure of 6 months
With all due respect,
pre-Christmas.
Michael, you are the head of an extremely profitable overall company, E.ON, supplying energy to millions of people. You've asked the government to intervene. You're asking Ofgem to regulate better. What's your responsibility?
Well, our responsibility is to serve our customers as well as we possibly can, and that's absolutely what we do.
Why can't
But
you do more to
we
change
have-
that system? Because I think when people are watching, what they will think about, they will accept, you know, most of what you've said about global forces and about the government wanting to intervene. But you could make the system fairer. You could make it fairer for people who cannot afford to pay, and it's more expensive for them on prepayment meters because of those standing charges.
Absolutely. As I said, those charges are regulated by Ofgem, and we do a huge amount to make it fairer.
How?
We
What?
invest in the energy company obligation, for instance, where we do interventions to help customers become more energy efficient. We've done over 1.5 million measures over the past few years that significantly reduce customer bills, and we're absolutely lobbying hard for the government to increase the energy company obligation so that we can do more. And we know that that is the best way to reduce bills over the long term. Not only does it reduce bills, it also is the first step to net zero. So that's why we're so passionate about energy efficiency as, if there is such a thing, a silver bullet to this crisis, because it solves customer bill problems and it also drives us off gas and drives us towards net zero.
Do you think the system is rigged against poorer customers? Not deliberately, but do you think it is rigged?
I think it should be looked at again, the fact
Right.
that prepayment meter customers pay more than direct debit customers. And that's something, as I said, we've lobbied for a social tariff. We would like to see the poorest customers getting a better deal. But in the end, this is regulated by Ofgem.
They may want you to be more muscular about it, but let's go back to energy prices more broadly. Do you think they will go back to what they were? How long do you think we're going to be in this period for? I know I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball.
Well, I think for the next 18 months, we're likely to see higher prices. That's already baked in, certainly in October and probably into next year as well. I think the longer term development depends on what happens in the war in the Ukraine, what happens with Mr. Putin. I have no idea how that will develop, but it's all about how Russian gas flows will develop. What I can say is that the drive to net zero is the long-term way to get off gas, to get off international gas prices, and to drive down costs over the long term.
You said it's long term. Is that part of the problem, that it is going to take a very long time before anyone will realise the benefits of it?
Well, not all of it is long term. I've talked about energy efficiency. We know that if we still had the same energy efficiency today as we had in 2005, energy bills would be much, much higher, because we've already done a lot of work to reduce bills reduce consumption by 25 to 30% through energy efficiency. We can do more and we can accelerate it very quickly. That can happen for this winter and the following winter. So not all of it is long term, and that's why I say energy efficiency is the silver bullet, because it's the first step to net zero, but it's also a way of reducing bills in the short term.
Michael Lewis, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
The UK is facing an unusual and unprecedented outbreak. Yes, I'm afraid another one. There's no sign we're heading back to the dark days of COVID, but cases of the monkeypox virus have been detected in at least a dozen countries around the world, including 20 cases here. It's not usually found outside of West Africa, so scientists are trying to work out why it's spreading. So should we be concerned? Well, the woman tracking all of this for the UK's Health Security Agency is Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Susan Hopkins. Welcome to the programme. Lovely to see you. Susan, how ill does monkeypox make you?
So monkeypox in the main is a self-limiting mild illness, and in the cases that we've seen to date in the UK, that has been the case, where the vast majority of people get better by themselves with supportive treatment, taking some painkillers if needed, drinking fluids, etc.
So how worried should people be about it? I mean, there are reports, as you will have noticed this weekend, of someone being treated in intensive care. Should we be concerned about it?
So clearly this is a new infectious disease that's spreading in our community that we haven't seen in our communities before. Therefore, we will need to learn a lot about it, both here and in other countries, over the coming weeks. We do know from reports from Africa, where this disease has circulated in outbreaks over many years, that there are certain individuals who are much more at risk of severe disease, particularly immunosuppressed individuals or young children. In adults, we think it's relatively mild, but again, we will learn more.
Right. I mean, on Friday there were 20 cases. Have you found any more since then?
So we, again, will be releasing updated numbers tomorrow with the over the weekend figures. We are detecting more cases on a daily basis. And I'd like to thank all of those people who are coming forward for testing to sexual health clinics, to the GPs and emergency departments.
I mentioned those reports of someone being treated in intensive care. Can you confirm those reports?
We don't confirm individual reports on individual patients.
So do you understand why this spike of cases is happening in Europe now?
So we know that there's been a period of restrictions across Europe, and we don't know where this infection has come from and how it's come into Europe. But no doubt it has come in at some point and then moved and managed to get into the networks that we're seeing the infections in. There's no obvious connection in our cases in the UK to a single event, but many people are reporting lots of different events that they've been to and lots of different contacts, close contacts with people, and also sexual contacts. That is a very good form of close contact that can allow transmission to occur.
Right, and you've talked about the close contact. That has led to some warnings about summer festivals, the holidays in general, because obviously kids will be out of school and there'll just be a lot more mixing. Is that something that we should be worried about?
So the risk to the general population remains extremely low at the moment, and I think people need to be alert to it. We really want clinicians to be alert to it and send the test if they're concerned. From the point of view of the general population, I think the important things that we talk about regularly: if you're feeling unwell, stay at home and avoid contact with others. If you develop a rash, immediately seek medical care, either by calling your GP or calling a sexual health clinic, whichever is more convenient for you. But what we're saying to people is that if you've got symptoms, avoid close contact with others and seek medical attention.
You've mentioned a couple of the symptoms. Just again, set those out for people so that they will recognise them.
Yeah, so the early symptoms, like with many infections, are non-specific. So it feels like a viral type infection,
right,
as we've all known about for the last while. So again, if you've got one of those, we advise people to stay at home, and we would continue to advise that. In the later stage, people develop a rash. The rash is usually on the face or the hands or the arms, and it can go to the genital area. It starts as a sort of red spots and then moves into vesicles. Those are little blister-type lesions,
right,
that look a little bit like chickenpox, and then they scab over. And once the scabs have fallen off, people are no longer infectious.
OK, and at that point, they're no longer infectious.
Exactly.
Community transmission, is that going on?
Well, absolutely. We are finding cases that have no identified contact with an individual from West Africa, which is what we've seen previously in this country. But the community transmission is largely centred in urban area, and we are predominantly seeing it in individuals who self-identify as gay or bisexual, or other men who have sex with men.
Why is that?
But that's because of the frequent close contacts they may have. We would recommend anyone who's having changes in sex partners regularly, or having close contacts with individuals that they don't know, to come forward if they develop a rash.
Are you confident that there's enough information out there for GP surgeries and maybe clinics that specialise in infectious diseases?
So I think the clinics that specialise in infectious diseases and sexual health clinics are very well aware of this, and we've done some teaching. I think we're also working with the wider population, and thankfully the communications and media around this week has really helped raise awareness. We have services available that can be called for advice lines for GPs, emergency departments and infectious diseases units. And it's all of us working together that will help and identify these cases.
Obviously, we're all familiar with vaccinations at the moment. Will we need to get vaccinated for monkeypox?
So the vaccinations there's no direct vaccine for monkeypox, but we are using a form of smallpox vaccine, a third generation smallpox vaccine that's safe in individuals who are contacts of cases. So we're not using it in the general population, we're using it in individuals who we believe are at high risk of developing symptoms, and using it early, particularly within 4 or 5 days of the case developing symptoms for contacts, reduces your risk of developing disease. So that's how we're focusing our vaccination efforts at this point.
Dr. Susan Hopkins, thank you very much for joining me today and giving us all that information. Now, Professor Brian Cox has been travelling the world to bring other worlds and planets to life for thousands of people people at live arena events. Using state-of-the-art technology, his new show Horizons seeks to explore and explain everything from black holes to the red planet. He joins me live in a moment. But one burning question I have for the particle physicist was asked in the US this week as Congress looked into evidence of UFO sightings. Is there life out there?
Unidentified aerial phenomena are a potential national security threat, and they need to be treated that way. UAPs are unexplained, it's true, but they are real. They need to be investigated, and many threats they pose need to be mitigated.
So welcome to you, Brian Cox. Just listening to that there, what is your view? Is there a chance intelligent alien life forms have found their way to Earth?
Well, yes. I think the key here is unidentified. It's a big leap. And it's one of the great mysteries, actually. I mean, this question, are we alone? Let's not say in the universe. There are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. I'm sure there are others out there. But the question, there's quite a sharp question you can ask, which is, where is the next civilization? And you can make an argument, just from looking at biology, the history of life on Earth, that civilizations might be extremely rare. There could be, on average, 1 per galaxy, perhaps, just a handful. And that's interesting because there are 2 almost mutually exclusive ideas there. There are 400 billion suns in the Milky Way galaxy, so we are physically insignificant on this world, there's no doubt. But imagine this is the only place where there are collections of atoms that can think and you know, build a civilization.
It is hard to get your head round the idea that, as you say, we are literally sort of microscopically small when you look at the universe in its entirety. But in terms of intelligent life forms, let's use that expression, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the correct answer is we don't know, which is why it's worth looking, and we do look.
So you are curious, obviously. My view, if I was to guess, if you forced me to guess, I would say there may be microbes all over the place. That's why we're looking for life on Mars, for example. But in terms of intelligence, just one thing to think about. The origin of life on Earth, it looks like we have good evidence life was present 3.8 billion years ago. And the first civilization to appear on Earth was about now, give or take. So it took the best part of 4 billion years to go from the origin of life on Earth to a civilization. And that's a third of the age of the universe. And that is a long time. So that may indicate that microbes may be common, but things like us may be extremely rare. It's interesting that it's so philosophical, because when you think of physics and science, you don't always or automatically think of the big philosophical questions. How much time do you spend sort of dwelling on it?
Oh, a lot. And you mentioned the live show. It works on multiple levels. And one of the levels is the question, you know, I just said there are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. There is a legitimate question. What does that mean then? And that's not just the province of science. In fact, I think cosmology, more than any other science, raises questions that transcend science. They're questions that we need to know and can be extremely useful to us just in broader life to consider. I mean, just that question of our solitude, to say that imagine that we are the only civilization in the Milky Way galaxy. I posed this question, by the way, at the climate summit. You know,
oh, did you?
Yeah. They asked me, what would you, if you had one thing to say to the world leaders, what would it be?
And that was it.
And I said, imagine that you're responsible for the only world in a galaxy of 400 billion suns.
The responsibility.
Imagine that. Just to take that responsibility seriously. Imagine there's nobody else there.
That does feel lonely. But
well,
while I've got you here, tell us about your tour.
Well, it's at one level, it's an exploration of what we know and don't know. A lot of black holes. Black holes are fascinating things. These are just, you know, collapsed stars. Well, we just got a picture of one last week, you know, in the centre of the Milky Way galaxy, and there it is actually. That's 4 million times the mass of our sun. That thing. And in some sense, you're looking at the end of time in space. And that's what becomes interesting. And fascinatingly, it's one of the best the arguments I know for blue skies research. Right? Why do we care about that? The research into those things is informing the way that we build quantum computers, believe it or not, which is absolutely bizarre. So there's a link between trying to understand those and questions Stephen Hawking posed back in the 1970s and the way that we're trying today to build these fascinating devices that may transform the way that we do computing. So the lesson, Einstein said, he had this beautiful quote. He said, if you pay attention to nature in all its beauty and complexity, and you just keep pulling the intellectual threads, then sometimes you catch a glimpse of something deeply hidden, which is a beautiful phrase.
Sounds very poetic and profound.
Which is the deep structure of nature. And it's useful to us to understand the deep structure of nature.
Well, and if you understand that, it is all about how relevant we might be and, let's say, life on Mars, which is something you've done a lot of work on, and you've got a new programme out about it. Why should we care?
Well, I mean, life on Mars, there are many answers. One is that if you want to understand how life began here on Earth, which is profound, it's how did we come to be here? Actually, the evidence is just essentially eliminated on Earth. Earth's a very active world with volcanoes and geology and so on. Mars, if life began on Mars, it's been in deep freeze for over 3 billion years. And so kind of paradoxically, the evidence for how life begins, which is, as you said, is a profound philosophical question, might be better preserved on Mars. So we might learn a lot more about ourselves by discovering that life began on Mars.
Will it have lots of answers, do you think? I mean, you went behind the scenes at NASA's Mars mission.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
Well, we were following the rover. As we speak, there's a rover there called Perseverance, and it's driving autonomously across the surface of Mars, and it's taking samples on an ancient river delta. So it's a remarkable idea. Once, 4 billion years ago, water flowed on the surface of Mars. And this robot is taking a look, drilling little samples. Ultimately, they're going to come back to Earth, those samples, so we can analyse it and look for, I mean, it's again a question, was there a second genesis in our solar system?
Gosh.
Or it's possible life began on Earth and was transferred to Mars, or vice versa, because there are bits of Mars on Earth, meteorites, and there are bits of Earth on Mars. So we don't even know whether life began on Mars and then got sort of launched off the surface by some meteorite impact and landed on Earth, and we're Martians. We don't even know the answer to that.
I see. What is your, when you think about the future of humanity, what do you think the biggest risk might be?
I think it's a lack of perspective. I mean, as we began talking, the idea that we might be the only civilization for thousands or even millions of light years. I think that science it's useful on many levels, but one of the things it's very useful at is giving us a perspective, which is a wider perspective. And actually, I don't think many of us think, many of our political leaders maybe, don't really think in terms of, is it possible that this is the only, let's say it, the only island of meaning in a galaxy of 400 billion suns? That matters. I don't think that's some kind of, whimsical idea. It might focus the mind. One of my great heroes, actually, who gave the BBC Reith Lectures, 1953, was Robert Oppenheimer. And it's worth reading, actually, because he thought very carefully, because he'd worked on the Manhattan Project, and he felt that the power, the knowledge he had delivered, and his colleagues, in terms of the atom bomb, was such that our civilization did not have the wisdom to control it.
Gosh, and that was back in the 1950s.
It was before the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he thought about, is there anything we can do? Is there anything this project of understanding nature science can teach us that will allow us to perhaps behave more responsibly and allow us to persist into the future?
Brian Cox, thank you very much. Fascinating, as always. Come back again when you have any answers. Now, back down to earth with a bump. There were audible sighs of relief from Downing Street this week as the Metropolitan Police investigation into parties during lockdown concluded. They issued 126 fixed penalty notices in total, but no further fines for the Prime Minister. Now everything hangs on the hotly anticipated Sue Gray report, which could be out within days. There are fresh questions for the Prime Minister this morning too over what was discussed at a meeting between him and Sue Gray several weeks ago. Earlier this week, he was asked to guarantee Number 10 wouldn't block any names being made public. Here's what he had to say.
That will be entirely up to Sue Gray, and I'll be looking forward very much to seeing what she has to say, and fingers crossed that will be pretty soon next week.
And the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, is here with me. Nadhim Zahawi, you're the Education Secretary, so I need to ask you a question. We heard from Dr. Susan Hopkins just a few moments ago. She says monkeypox is spreading here. What plans are you making?
It is serious, and the Secretary of State for Health has already bought the vaccine, which is important, and I know that he and his team and the UKHSA Health and Security Agency will continue to monitor this. So we're taking it very, very seriously. And he had the foresight to buy the vaccine in the first place, to be able to have a first line of defence against monkeypox. But I'm sure there'll be further discussions as well.
All right, let's talk about the Sue Gray report. It's been a long-awaited, detailed investigation. Of course, it was paused or certainly held back while the Metropolitan Police finished their investigation. No more fines for the Prime Minister. But Sue Gray has been looking in detail about what went on at Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown with those lockdown and rule-breaking parties. Can the Prime Minister survive this when this is published?
Well, I think a couple of things to say on that. One, the Prime Minister has always ensured that Sue Gray, and Sue Gray is a very senior civil servant. I've worked with Sue Gray, I know Sue Gray, and I know that she's gone where the evidence has taken her. You remember her first report. She didn't, pull her punches. It was pretty robust.
So you think he can survive?
Well, and he made the changes after her first report. Remember, she said that actually
we haven't had the full report yet, Nadhim Zahawi.
I hear you. But even with the interim report, or first report, he still took that on board, made the changes, new chief of staff, new deputy chief of staff.
Yes.
Andrew Griffiths going into the...
but he's still there, even though he's at the top of the organisation.
And he's the right to be, because I think the Prime Minister has always, throughout this process, allowed Sue Gray to conduct herself independently. More important than that, Joe, and you will know this, right? This is the Prime Minister who delivered Brexit, who delivered the vaccine.
We don't need to go through his greatest hits, as you would see.
Why wouldn't you?
Let me ask you a straightforward question. Will all the evidence that Sue Gray has gathered be published in full, put into the public domain?
Sue Gray makes that decision. Sue Gray has complete control over this. I haven't seen the report. She will publish that report when she thinks
welcome it.
It's right. I would absolutely welcome it. It's the right thing to do. And I think it's important that the Prime Minister then come back to the dispatch box and respond to that, as he has promised he would do. So ultimately, what matters is people understand what happened and then learn the lessons from it.
So you would be pleased to see all the photos, all the CCTV, all the WhatsApp messages that Sue Gray has looked at in detail. You'd want to see it published.
I want to see Sue Gray publish what she thinks is right and appropriate. She, after all, is a formidable civil servant with a level of professionalism and integrity that is unquestionable.
Right.
She's been allowed to follow the evidence. She makes that decision, and we will all then see the report. Ministers and, of course, the nation and Parliament.
She is formidable, as you have said, but the Prime Minister is her boss. That's right, isn't it? And we now know that several weeks ago, the Prime Minister had a secret meeting with Sue Gray, the civil servant responsible for writing the report into the Partygate scandal that could determine his political future. Who called that meeting?
Hold on a second. You just called it a secret meeting. The Prime Minister meets his senior civil servants all the time.
Why would he want to meet? Why would he want to meet the person who is responsible for a report investigating his role and others in Partygate before that report is published?
Well, she's also the senior civil servant responsible for levelling up and making sure that the United Kingdom gains the benefit.
Are you comparing levelling up to
No.
law-breaking parties that went on at Downing Street?
No, Joe, you just agreed with me that Sue is formidable and has a reputation for integrity that is unquestionable. Let me just finish.
Why did the Prime Minister call a meeting with her?
So I just said to you, the Prime Minister meets his civil servants all the time. I don't know why they had that meeting a couple of weeks ago. All I can say to you, I don't believe it's material to the outcome of the investigation. Why? Let me tell you why. Because the PM has always said that Sue Gray can take the report to wherever the evidence takes her. Sue Gray's doing this independently. The Prime Minister will not interfere
he didn't need
or
to call a meeting, but just to clarify and be clear.
Yes.
You are saying the Prime Minister called that meeting with Sue Gray?
No, I just said I don't. I said to you, I don't know. I said to you, I don't know who called the meeting. What I'm saying to you is I don't believe that is material to the outcome of the investigation. Why? Because Sue Gray, you just agreed with me, is professional and has the highest level of integrity. She is independent. The Prime Minister will never intervene.
You've already been
interfere
asked,
in the investigation. He would never do that.
Right. You say he would never do that, but political influence is what people will be asking. You've been asked about this earlier today. Have you not called up number 10 to find out who called that meeting?
I don't need to. You know why?
Well, who did call it then?
No, hold on a second. Because first of all, I don't need to, because I don't believe that having a meeting with your senior civil servant is material to the outcome. That civil servant is independent in their investigation and has the highest level of professionalism and integrity. The Prime Minister has made it very clear that he has never intervened or will seek to intervene or interfere with the investigation. What is material is Sue is able to publish the report that she will publish.
No, I'm afraid there's a problem here.
No,
do you not think the public... Well, you're saying there isn't. You don't need to know. Do you think the public need to know? Because politicians, including the Prime Minister, have said repeatedly, we need to draw a line under this. We need to move on. We need to be transparent. What is transparent about a meeting between the Prime Minister and the person responsible, potentially, for deciding his political future? Why doesn't the public have a right to know who called that meeting and what happened?
I've just tried to explain to you that the Prime Minister meets his senior civil servants all of the time. His diary has many meetings. I've seen reports that Sue Gray's suggested the meeting, but if you ask me about my own diary, and you say to me, Secretary of State, who put that meeting in the diary? So a diary secretary may put the meeting in the diary. I don't think that's material. You're throwing mud at something which doesn't exist.
No, I'm not throwing mud at anything at all. I'm asking you to explain to our viewers why the Prime Minister thought it was necessary to meet with somebody who could decide his political future. How do you think that looks unless we know for sure who called whom? The government says she summoned him, and they talked about whether or not she was going to release photos with the report. She says he summoned her and no photos were discussed. What happened?
So all I'm saying to you is I don't believe that the Prime Minister meeting... You've been around politics for a long time, Joe.
Meeting
you know
a civil
Prime
servant with
meet their civil servants.
I do, but this is
all
a
the
civil
time.
servant.
There's no senior civil servants. So you're creating a sort of dare I say, a cloud of sort of uncertainty around this when there isn't one.
Clear it up.
Well, I am telling
clear it up.
I've just said
clear
to
it
you.
up for us.
Right.
Did Boris Johnson call Sue Gray, or did Sue Gray say, I'd like to have a meeting with you?
Well, the way I will clear it up for you is Boris Johnson has always said he will not interfere or intervene in Sue Gray's investigation.
What does this look like?
And he has not done that.
Can you? How do you know?
Because he's absolutely on record as saying he won't do it, and he's reassured the country he won't do it. And if there's any evidence of that, then tell me where you get that from. You're actually questioning Sue Gray's integrity, because she would never allow it. Because Sue Gray, I've known her for years, I've worked with her, is a professional and has the highest level of integrity. So you're now saying, a minute ago you told me you thought she was professional, and
I'm asking questions as to what happened here to try and get to the bottom of it, because transparency, you have said and your government says, is important. Some people, and when I talk about some people, viewers saying he was trying to influence what she put in her report. That's what they may think. And there is a Prime Minister who has said repeatedly there were no parties at Downing Street and no rules were broken. We know now that's not true.
And it's the same Prime Minister that said he'll come to the dispatch box and actually explain after the police investigation. He did that. He will come to the dispatch box and explain after Sue Gray publishes her report. You agree with me that Sue Gray has the highest level of integrity and professionalism. She has gone wherever the evidence takes her, and she will make the decision as to what to publish. And I trust the process, and I trust Sue Gray to do the right thing, because Sue Gray will never allow herself to behave in any other way. That's the whole point here.
Even if Boris Johnson wanted to have a meeting with her to discuss the content of her report?
Boris Johnson has meetings with all the civil servants, senior civil servants, many times, because they have other responsibilities as well as her responsibility.
Has anyone in government made any attempt to contact or influence what's in Sue Gray's report?
No. I don't believe anybody would ever even countenance the fact, because it's only right that Sue Gray is allowed to conduct her report, her investigation. And Sue Gray, I said to you earlier, I've worked with her. I know she has the highest level of integrity and would never allow that. Look at what she did on... hold on. We have evidence here, right?
I'm not questioning Sue Gray. I'm only really interested in the Prime Minister here.
We have evidence here, right? Because you judge someone on their track record. Her first report, Sue didn't pull her punches. It was a pretty punchy report that the Prime Minister had to come and respond to and change the way things are done in number 10. right?
All right.
I
well,
have
let's go back. Let's go back to the
in
changes.
Sue Gray and what she will then publish.
Let's go back to the changes. She also criticised failures in leadership at number 10 in that initial report. Are you ashamed that Downing Street is the most fined address in Britain? 83 people, 126 fines.
So the Prime Minister came to the dispatch box and actually explained
I'm
what
not
happened.
asking you that. Are you ashamed of that?
Of course we have to learn the lessons from that. Everybody who has had a fine must reflect on this, right? Hold on, Joe, right? The Prime Minister then didn't just make a statement, made fundamental changes in number 10. A new Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff, having
So
Steve
lots of other
Barclay
people
take
lost
over.
their jobs. That's
Well,
fine.
no.
And he thinks he changed the culture. But let me talk to you, because you were a businessman, Nadhim Zahawi. We've spoken many times about your life prior to politics. If you were running a company now and 83 members of your staff, including you, were fined for flagrant law breaking, would you resign?
So, one, it depends on what actually happened, and I think the Prime Minister, we've seen now...
But I'm asking you that instant. Would you resign? Would you take accountability?
People were throwing brickbats at the Prime Minister saying, he's going to get fined many, many times over. He's been fined once, and the police investigation is over. With even that fine, he came to the dispatch and explained why he felt he had actually done the right thing, and he didn't feel he had... he felt he was inadvertently misled Parliament and apologised for it.
Inadvertently doing a lot of very heavy lifting here.
Joe,
I mean, the thing is, I'm talking about the staff. If you were running a company and your staff were fined,
yes,
as the head of an organisation, would you feel accountable and would you feel you had to take the responsibility for the culture that existed that meant those staff actually broke the law?
And you remember when the Prime Minister got the fine and paid the fine, he made a statement that I am fully accountable and I want to make sure that we learn the lessons and do much better, because he's focusing on, we've got a war in Europe. We've just completed the most successful booster campaign, which, by the way, if the Prime Minister hadn't taken the decision to buy the vaccines, which I was witness to, we wouldn't have had
so we
an
should
opening
forgive.
at Christmas.
We should forgive the law breaking.
No, what I'm saying is we should learn from that, always hold ourselves to high standards, and that's what the Prime Minister is doing. That's what the team now is doing in number 10. That's the right thing to do. Sue Gray will publish her report, and the Prime Minister will respond to it in Parliament. That is the right thing to do. The nation expects the Prime Minister to continue to deliver recovery in the economy.
Well, you don't know
We
that,
are in a global battle against inflation, right? He has to deliver that recovery in the economy, right? That battle is being waged all over the world, in America, in Europe.
All right, well, let's talk
here,
about the economy,
right?
the cost of living. Shall we talk about those economic issues? Because, as you know, it's a huge challenge. The windfall tax on oil and gas companies, profitable companies. Should it happen?
Right. So the Chancellor will look at all the options. Let's look at the oil and gas companies.
What's holding you back from making a decision
let me explain
on this?
to you.
The Chancellor's been looking at these options.
You've just asked me the question, Joe. Allow me to explain. Right? You asked me about the windfall tax. Those energy companies get taxed at twice the rate of other corporations. They pay 40% tax. Let me finish. They've all pledged to invest in renewables, 70 billion of investment. If they make that investment, and the Chancellor is going to hold them to account, wants to see the roadmap for that investment, right, then that's a good thing. The third item on this, right, because there is no easy option here. There is no cost option.
And it's not easy for people paying their bills.
If you tax them with a windfall tax, then they may reduce their dividend. Who gets the dividend? Pensioners get the dividend, because through their pension funds, right? So there's no easy options.
So it doesn't sound like you're in favour of it.
No, hold on a sec. I'm saying we will review everything. We've put 22 billion in the next 12 months of help to those people who need it the most. In July, right, 34 million people get a tax cut of £330 per annum. Because why? This Chancellor has listened and actually dealt with the national insurance threshold. Let me just follow me with this
Nadhim,
thought, right?
we haven't got that much time, and we
I know,
have
we
already been
spent a lot of time about a meeting with
well, you not
Sue
think
Gray.
it's important?
No, of course it's important. But what's more important is her report and her independence and her ability to follow the evidence.
Is it a matter of time before this government does announce some kind of windfall tax?
So the Chancellor will want to look at all the options. He's looking at the data as to what's happening with the energy spike, what's happening with the weekly shop. In April, people got £150.
I know.
Council tax rebate. They will get £200 discount on the energy bills in October. But the thing he will do, and I promise you this, is the Chancellor will see how he can target help to the people who need it the most.
Will he uprate benefits?
Be on their
will
side.
He uprate benefits in line with inflation?
He will look at Every option.
No, I know he's
is
looking at the
under
options, but what should he?
He will look at the Chancellor will make the decision, but he is on people's side and he will deliver that help. 22 billion in 12 months is what was being delivered now, and he'll go even further.
Yes or no?
I've just said to you, he'll go even further.
Yes, well, we're expecting him to go even further because that's what the government has said. Could there be anything in the Sue Gray report that we have spent a lot of time talking about that would make you rethink your support for the Prime Minister?
So, I don't know what's in the Sue Gray report. Right, you don't know what's in it. Nobody knows until she publishes it.
Is there anything?
Right? The Prime Minister has my full confidence. Do you know why? Because every time he said he will come to Parliament, explain himself and make changes that are fundamental. He's focused on the economy, on making sure that we have safer streets.
We haven't got any time, but thank you very much for joining me. That's it from me. And Sophie will be here with you next Sunday from all of us here. Bye-bye.